Does the membrane block the smoke on pork ribs? I'm going to test that and find out. I wanted to start with a standard St. Louis cut ribs, but the store only had spare ribs. But lucky for me, the spare ribs contain the St. Louis cut. It just takes a little bit of butchery and a few minutes and you're good to go. Once I had that St. Louis cut, I cut them in half so that way I had two different pieces from the same rack. And on one of the sides, I removed the membrane, and the other one, I'm going to leave it intact. Removing the membrane is really easy, just takes a little bit of practice. All you need is a butter knife or a spoon, and you stick it along one of the bones underneath the membrane, which will free it up. And then you use a paper towel for grip, and you can just yank it and pull it right off. And some days you're going to be the statue, and other days you're the bird. And in this case, I was the statue, and it came off in a bunch of different pieces, but even then, it really wasn't that bad. In order to keep things simple, I used a real basic rub of just salt and black pepper, and that way the flavor is not going to be masked by a bunch of rubs and sauces. We're going to get just the smoke flavor coming through, and that'll make it easier to tell the difference. For the cook, I set up the kettle just the same way that I would normally do for low and slow, and then I tucked those ribs in for a few hours until they got to the color that I like. And they've just gotten to that point. I'm going to go ahead and wrap them, and then I'm going to cook them to tenderness before digging in. My go-to test to see if ribs are done is to grab it on one end, lift it up, and see if it cracks. If it cracks, it's done. If it breaks in half, you went just a little bit too far. Fortunately, that's not going to work because I've split these in half, and so I've got to go and use the probe instead. Now, I'm not looking for temperature. What I'm looking for is consistency. How hard is it to be able to push this probe in there, and it should go in just like it's going into warm butter. And I think these are just about there, so I'm going to go ahead and take these inside, let them rest for a bit, and we'll dig in and show you the results. The idea for this test came from Barbecue Hall of Famer Meathead from AmazingRibs.com. I've linked to his article down in the description below that's all about membranes, so that way you can learn more. Now, let's get back to the taste test. All right, so these ribs are done and rested. Let's go ahead and cut into them and see what kind of smoke ring we have, and then we can do a taste test to see what the smoke flavor looks like. Now, because of the anatomy of pork ribs, these ones that had the membrane removed are a little bit thinner than these ones that kept it on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut right over here and get the one just barely in from the center, and so that way we're looking at about as close meat as we can possibly do. So now that they're cut, I'm wondering if you can tell the difference between the two. Up close and personal, for me, it does appear that the one without the membrane has a little bit better smoke ring on the bottom where the membrane was than the one that didn't. But smoke ring doesn't always mean flavor. In fact, in competitions, it's not one of the criteria. So let's go ahead and dig in. We're going to taste these and see how they turned out. So after trying both of those ribs, I don't really notice a big difference between them. They both have about the same level of smokiness and tenderness, whether or not they had the membrane or not. And this is interesting because this is a big barbecue argument out there, and it ended up not being as big of a deal. That said, I'll still end up removing the membrane because I don't like the chewy or rubbery feel that often happens when you cook these ribs. Sometimes you'll bite into a rib with a membrane on it, it'll pull off and bring some of the meat off with it. But if you're just going for flavor, it really doesn't matter and you can save the time.